It's October the 10th, 2024. I'm going to be a host tonight. I'm Dana Durnford. Welcome, everybody. I have to put this on so I know to record it. These are difficult stories to talk about. We're talking about Sellafield, and it's also the Keystone, the Mayak anniversary. We usually cover that each year on the same day. Not every year. Some years we'll do an individual Keystone nuclear event. They had a significant event. And then Sellafield. And plutonium from Sellafield is in all children's teeth. Plutonium, by the way, in all the studies, killed all the animals. Welcome back, everybody. I apologize. No show last night. I was sick all day, and I was debating all the way up until my typical time period whether I should try to do something. And an hour after my normal show, I was in bed asleep. And then I was sick all day. I was lit down most of the day. Feeling a bit better tonight, so that's cool. Hoping to do better tomorrow. I couldn't get comfortable all day today. This is not about me, this is about the victims. So just let me run through, because this is kind of important, let me run through the dog studies from Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, Dr. Raymond Gilmedy. Now, he done studies, toxicity of inhaled plutonium dioxide in beagle dogs. It was around 94 studies. And I collected these 10 years ago or something like that. So he's killed a lot more beagle dogs and puppies since then. But his one study was 144 beagle dogs and puppies. And death from radiation occurred 1.5 to 5.4 years after the exposures. Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occurred. So tumors in the skeleton means mutated stem cells for young people, young animals, and birds and stuff like this. So it's extra insidious. Bone tumors found in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. So skeleton tumors, all the dogs died. Now, curium isotope is the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel, according to the same Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, which is the Navy, the U.S. Navy. And so curium isotopes are the major byproduct in radiated fuel rods. Don't worry about the fact that they're a significant fraction of the alpha emitting. They're the biggest byproduct of gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas. So the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods. And you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium, which killed all the dogs. But, and they suggest in the study, in the bottom sentence, these findings in dogs suggest similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans exposed to plutonium, which is man-made. 238 in particular, which is not the biggest byproduct of plutonium, is 239, which is nasty, much more nastier than the 238, which is very nasty, obviously. But that statement that humans can expect similar dose-related issues, but it was actually discovered that human kidneys are at least 50 times less efficient than an animal kidney at removing the plutonium. So a human is 50 times more vulnerable than the dog, and every dog died in every study. And terrible way to die, and they let these dogs die from the tumors. So it's a terrible way because you can't, skeleton tumors, you can't mitigate the pain, right? Not that Loveless does stuff like that. And then the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod is not plutonium, it's actually curium. Curium need lead shielding 20 times thicker. It's kind of important to remember those particular facets, and that the humans are 50 times less efficient. So we're 50 times more vulnerable than the animal, and all the animals died in all the studies. And so when you see headlines that plutonium from Sellafield was in all the children's teeth, then that's quite significant, right? Now, Sellafield, recently we done a satellite picture of Sellafield, and to our absolute horror, as far as you can see, there's farms, and all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. And they're typically all surrounded by farms. And if you've done satellite pictures of every nuclear power plant, this is probably what you're going to see at 99.5% of them. This same particular attribute. And you do that because that's the best way to move the radiation out of the areas, out of the local, and it's the best way to poison you. And make no mistake about it, that is what the industry's intention is by building these facilities in prime farmland, is to poison everybody. And so when all the shots, when you get airborne shots or satellite shots, you start to realize of all nuclear power plants, and this is Sellafield. And Sellafield was a reprocessing facility. On top of that, the reprocessed fuel, which is insidious, illegal in Canada and the United States, even though the government is doing it in some applications, like Canada's Chalk River National Laboratory is doing it. And the United States, there's a couple of the national laboratories. Los Alamos National Laboratory is one of them. And the emissions from that process, and the same thing with Loch in France, are just atrocious. And that the Arctic is considered contaminated from these processing facilities, particularly, and Europe, from Loch and from Donerae in UK, and also, which is closed now. And they expect 300 years before you can mitigate that. The whole story of nuclear is insane. We're going to try to work our way through this tonight. But remember, as far as you can see, a typical nuclear power plant, they're going to be surrounded by farms. That's not an accident. And it shows this contempt, this absurd contempt for everybody. And that's part of the poll we got tonight, is to try to appreciate, did the United Kingdom cover up damage of Windscale nuclear meltdown, considering every kid has plutonium in their teeth? And we're kicking ass again. We got 10 people in our show. Oh my goodness. I know I only been at it a decade. I probably don't deserve to have that many people this soon. And I think that's pretty incredible. And when you go into the news cycle today, there was only one story on Windscale or Sellafield. Just one story. And that was playing down. It's really, we should be ashamed of humanity. Certainly, we should be terrified of the media. Windscale and Cumberland, a double anniversary. In Cumberland, which is the Tetra River, and there was around 7,000 little tiny communities were evacuated long after they were contaminated. And there's still several hundred communities along the Tetra River, which is still because the original MIAC, they were just dumping all the nuclear waste into the river because they didn't know how to shield themselves from the gammas, the X-rays, the neutron bombardments, the beta rays. And so the Bremsstrahlung, which I know I'm butchering, that is a German word, is a braking effect. And so gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas, for instance, they don't mingle with each other. And these are pulses of energy almost at the speed of light. Just bear with me. I got to move this microphone just a bit closer. I'll be back. There you go. That should be better. That should be better for me anyway, because if it's not right there, then I'm going to lean forward, and then you know what happens eventually. You get a bad neck and everything, right? So the Bremsstrahlung, which is a braking effect in English. So you got alphas and neutrons and betas and gammas, particles, atoms from the chain reaction. And when they pulse energy almost at the speed of light, they don't mingle with each other. They hit each other and then they change direction. It's known as a braking effect. But you're talking about each object is almost at the speed of light, and that creates an X-ray. So all the species in all the forests and meadows worldwide are getting full-body X-rays, and so is everybody in the communities, the cities, because of the anthropogenic man-made radiation. And so they were using the Bromson-Lung effect, the breaking effect, to determine strontium-90 contamination in the Chester River population in 1994, which is quite interesting. Because in order to have that particular breaking effect, you've got to have other emissions. And so they were able to detect that particular, which is the X-rays, is what they're talking about. And you don't see too many studies actually acknowledging that particular way, right? Now, United Kingdom, for decades, for over 3 decades, we know, we can document 100%, were dumping nuclear waste. They had special cargo ships, and that's all they'd done. They went out in the Atlantic Ocean, on the continental shelf, which is the nursery of the Atlantic, and dumped 45-gallon drums and everything else over the side. And anything that didn't sink was shot. Now, when you're dumping it in the ocean, once it gets down a couple of atmospheres, which is around 33 feet, each atmosphere is around 33 feet, is around 14.7 pounds per square inch extra pressure. So by the time it gets down 2 atmospheres, those drums are going to collapse, and the top and bottom of the drums are pressed on, and so they will release. And so this dumping in the ocean was catastrophic. And they'd done it for over 3 decades, most likely a lot longer than that. And so they also, in 2018, there was a secret plan to dump 22 nuclear submarines in Scotland's waters. And because they don't know, the reactors that on these ships, they don't know how to decommission them. And so there was a secret plan to dump them in the ocean. This is the arrogance, incredible hubris of this industry we see perpetrating crimes against humanity and the species. The UK government secretly planned to dump the radioactive hulks of 22 nuclear submarines in the sea off northwest Scotland. Now, Sellafield discharges 2 million gallons of radioactive water into the Irish Sea, the Atlantic, at high tide every single day. They say at high tide, but you can't contain it. It's from a mixed oxide fuel meltdown, a plutonium mixed oxide meltdown from 1957. And that's what the story is about tonight. But we'll also touch up on, we've got a bunch of studies from the KAIST and from the MIAC we'll touch up on too, so that these are incredibly important, because it shows you this incredible arrogance of this industry. And you can trace it all the way back to 1957, but you can trace it all the way back to 1955 when you look at what they done the exact same thing at Chalk River, at Chalk River National Laboratories, where they had a meltdown in 1955 in Canada on the Ottawa River. This industry apparently is attacking water, and there's an incredible amount of evidence to support that assertion, fresh and salt water. You know, when I come to the realization a long time ago, what is the one thing we all got in common is water, right? And then there's a lot of documentaries saying water has memories. Water is the only liquid on the planet that exists in all three forms: liquid, gas, and solids. And that you can't survive. We wouldn't exist if it wasn't for water. And we drink water and perspire water all the time. Oh, we got Chicago. Hello.
Oh, Mr. Dana.
Oh. Why are you calling in,
Tokyo Bureau, Chicago Division.
Why are you calling in, scumbag? That's stalker. Been stalking us for over 10 years. He won't give me his picture. He's always disrupting these shows. And it's incredible, disgusting parasite. And the closing song of our shows for the last almost month has been a song put together by James Lucid about him. That is a hilarious song. And so let's get back to Sellafield. I'm not interested in talking to a monster tonight. We're already talking about monsters. We don't need to talk to one. Sellafield discharges 2 million gallons of radioactive water into the Irish Sea every day at high tide. And this includes a cocktail of over 30 alpha, beta, and gamma radionuclides, neutrons, and X-rays. And the British nuclear fuel admits that the radioactive discharges in the 1970s were 100 times those of today, 100 times. 2 million gallons of radioactive water into the Irish Sea each day was 100 times a day in the 70s. This is still going on. This is still going on. And I got no interest in talking to a parasite. And he's a notorious parasite, this guy. He's a stalker, been stalking us for over 10 years. You can buy t-shirts of Calm Down Charlie that debunks his nonsense. But he's from Japan. His job is to harass me during these live shows. It's not just 30 alphas, betas, and gammas and radionuclides. It's all of them. It's the full range, which is around 1,000 isotopes. And the question is, why does people like him bother me when I only have 20 people on my show? I have 12 likes and 13 votes on my... How am I a threat to this industry that they got to stalk me for over 10 years? A leading government-backed scientist... Now, you can call into these shows. This is a call-in program tonight. And anybody but scumbag Calm Down Charlie is welcome to call in. Any pro-nuclear is welcome to call in. I'm in Canada. I'm going to bring that number up there. Maybe somebody can put it in the chat room. I know Dana and Asana probably already got it done, or will do it anyway. At 7:09, we're glad to hear also that Colette, who we know was in Florida, survived a hurricane. And still not, they got no power, no water. And I was horrified when I seen the cover-up in the major media last night. So you can call in at 709-589-4406. This is a call-in show. If you got any input or you're pro-nuclear, give us a call. We don't want to hear from Mishita because all he does is attack us and lie. A leading government-backed scientist from East Anglia Anglia, I can't remember, University discovered the plutonium particles concentrated in waves breaking on the shore was being blown over Western Columbia as far as 37 miles inland. 37 miles inland. Remember, these places are surrounded by farms. And the satellite pictures, 37 miles inland, you can imagine. It's much worse than that, by the way. And he's only talking about the discharges from the nuclear meltdown from 1957 that are still ongoing today at 2 million liters. And there's a lot more than that coming out of Fukushima, clearly. This was confirmed by analysts at vacuum cleaner house dust samples taken up and down the coast by the National Radiological Protection Board. A radioactive cloud floated out and 2 million liters of milk were poured away because of the contaminated risk. And then they didn't warn people. They didn't confirm that it was melted down. But they did do mitigation like that, but that's just temporary because they didn't keep doing it. And you should have been doing it. Well, you should have abandoned Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom after this happened. That's how nasty this stuff actually is. As radioactive flotsam was being washed ashore, posing a danger to the Health Department Environment, effectively closed the beach, warned the public not to use the 15-mile stretch of shore north and south of Sellafield, and this advice stayed in force for full 6 months. In June 1985, the British nuclear fuel faced a 3-day trial, was found guilty and fined 10,000 sterlings, or pounds rather, 10,000 pounds. And they most likely poisoned millions and millions of people up to that point. But the poison has never stopped because these disease factors are surrounded by farms. And British Nuclear Fuel's own environmental monitoring figures for the first quarter of 1997, this happened in 1957, 40 years later, revealed alarming raised levels of technetium-99 in seaweed sample from the West Columbian coast. And technetium-99 levels of 180,000 atoms per kilogram in seaweed samples from Driggs south of the plant in 1997. These are absurd numbers, by the way. It's absurd what we're talking about here. So the Irish Sea should never be fished again, and people should move off the coastlines. And this is the undeniable evidence. Killer heart particles, Sellafield coast like Chernobyl and Fukushima exclusion zone. Local health consequences. Now, this industry lies on a scale that is we don't have anything to compare it to. 1997 Ministry of Health report stated increases leukemia of children living on the English and Irish coast near Sellafield exceeded the national average by 10 times. And one child in 60 in Seascale, the village nearest to the plant, will die of leukemia. It's much worse than that, really. They have cancer clusters there of children. And then we have studies where they try to blame it on the common flu or population mixing of all things. And so this industry, its amount of contempt for everybody and everything is not sustainable. This is not tenable. This industry is clearly exterminating everybody and the species. And pretending that you're not capable or that nothing can be done about it is simply not true. The first step we got to do is acknowledge that this is a disaster that is going to go on for millions of years. And so then we might, once the population is aware of it, there's a good possibility we'll come up with some solutions. We can't mitigate what's already happened, clearly. But don't we have an obligation to deal with it? And by proxy then, don't we have an obligation to hold those responsible accountable? Its behavior in the marine environment is well known. That's another Chicago division. What's up with Calm Down Charlie? He doesn't understand to go away. I think you really got to be a lowlife to do what he's doing right now. Controlled releases of low-level liquid wastes from European nuclear fuel reprocessing operations resulted in a significant addition to the total inventories of plutonium in the seas of the Northern Hemisphere. The Northern Hemisphere. A significant inventory. And you can expect the same thing from Fukushima, of course, right? Fukushima is catastrophic. If you're not familiar, go into my playlist when you get around to it. And we have very detailed presentations on every facet of that planet killer. The principal sources at this time been the Sellafield Windscale site in the UK discharging into the Irish Sea. At that time, they were suggesting was, and what year was this study? I don't know, I haven't got it there. My apologies. It was 590 terabytes. It was 590 terabytes. 590 terabytes from the dumping into the ocean itself, not counting the meltdown, the emissions, and we'll cover some of that coming up here. Taking advantage of environmental concentration several orders of magnitude higher than those resulting from global fallout, which was a nuclear war, right? The nuclear testing was a nuclear war, including the underground test. They were all vented into the environment at very high speeds. Taking advantage of environmental concentration several orders of magnitude higher than those from global fallout. So right there, they're telling you that a single nuclear meltdown and this was a graphite reactor. This is nothing like Fukushima, which was pure uranium, pure plutonium. It was 4 reactors and 8 fuel pools. Each fuel pool with around 4 reactor cores. So they're saying several orders of magnitude higher than those resulting from global fallout. This, by the way, is still going on today. The emissions from this site are just catastrophic. There's over 1,000 buildings on that site at Sellafield, which used to be called Windscale. And we got a video explaining that coming up. Taking advantage of environmental concentration several orders of magnitude higher than those resulting from global fallout. A small fraction of the particle reactive radionuclides can be traced for over 2,500 kilometers. Well, a small fraction of a massive amount is a massive amount. However, most of the plutonium resides in the seabeds and intertidal sediment of the eastern Irish Sea. Well, it actually doesn't work that way. Like, they're suggesting that plutonium is a heavy particle. All these atoms are the exact same size, whether it's uranium, plutonium, or americium, or neptunium, or strontium, or anything else. And they're all the same size. And we actually got stories of them where they suggest that plutonium is heavy so it doesn't travel very far. And this is simply not true. The northern hemisphere was covered in plutonium post-Fukushima. On top of that, again, all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging it. From the fuel pools are all splitting atoms. Worldwide, there's over 1,000 fuel pools, not counting universities and national laboratories. And each of them are decades of reactor cores that are splitting atoms perpetually into the environment. That's why nuclear fuel is so dangerous, because it's still splitting atoms. Those atoms never go away, and they bioaccumulate into the biosphere, the atmosphere, and all species and all humans. You can trace the extinction event all the way back to the nuclear industry. Emissions over 80 years ago till now has condemned humanity and the 8 million, what's left of the species. How British Chernobyl nearly turned the north into a nuclear wasteland. So this was a story from today. A shithead named Josh Milton. And so what they're trying to do with this particular story today was suggest that it didn't get bad. It nearly turned the north into a nuclear wasteland when it's clearly turned all of Britain into a nuclear wasteland. And then equating it with Chernobyl rather than Fukushima, which would be the more appropriate, because there's 2 million liters a day still hemorrhaging into the Atlantic Ocean. For days now, only a Windscale, a nuclear plant on the coast, knew that one of the site's two plutonium-producing reactors was on fire. And these were plutonium mixed oxide fuel. These were breeder reactors. And what they do with them is they collect the plutonium to make the bombs. So these are weapons facility reactors. And so even when they melt down, they continue to produce. Even when you take the fuel out of the reactor and put it in the pool, the emissions are hideous for the rest of their legacy on Earth. They're always splitting atoms and there's no containment in the pools, right? And so when these things are burning out of control at enormous temperatures, the releases just in a 12-hour period are catastrophic for the entire planet. But this is still melting down today. They successfully covered it up. If the 1,300 degrees Celsius fire in front of them wasn't bad enough, the workers knew that any mistake could turn northwest England into a nuclear wasteland. Well, clearly it was a nuclear wasteland. If you got a fire, now you have a nuclear wasteland. And we can quantify that by their reactions over the next couple of weeks. October the 10th, 1957, a fire was discovered in Reactor 1, which manufactured plutonium for atomic weapons and powered homes. Now, the power was a byproduct of the chain reaction and the weapons. And that's how they sold it to the people to pay for it. The steam explosion was imminent, and the plant workers threw on radiation chutes to push the fuel rods out of the air-cooled graphic reactor. But the reality of it is that's simply not true, is it? That's not what really happened. They went out and jacked people from the local theaters. Let me get back on track here for a second. Yeah, right there. So I'm going to play this little clip for you. This was one of the people that were there And you can see it was a YouTube video. I put the graphics there to try to help articulate what they're talking about in the video. So my apologies, because I meant to redo this and I never did.
The police from the factory had turned up looking for volunteers, and they'd brought a bus, and they decided the best way to get the volunteers was to go to the cinema and volunteer the back 2 rows at the show to go into the factory to, as it turned out, to help push the fuel rods out of the reactor.
So they jacked people from the theaters, the back row, because in those days, the people in the back row, and feel free to call in at 709, we're in Canada, 589-4406. This is a call-in talk show. The other ones that tried to call us were the pro-nuclear community that has been stalking us for over a decade. They're incredible parasites. And you can buy T-shirts up at my site. It's really interesting because I haven't sold any T-shirts in the last couple of months. It was just like overnight I stopped selling T-shirts. I've never seen nothing like it in my life. The censorship on me is amazing. So when the buddy in the media says that they threw on radiation suits to push the fuel rods out of the graphite reactors, that's simply not true. Radioactive material including cancer-causing iodine-131. So when they invoke iodine-131, which is nasty isotope, by the way, the ratios are 132 or 10 times more, 133 or 30 times more, and 129 is 31 times more. And 132, 133 iodines are 9 times more effective ionizing radiating the thyroid glands of every species, including humans, than the incredibly efficient and effective iodine-131 is. And then the iodine-129 never goes away. It's got a 50 million year half-life. There's 10 half-lives. So 150 million years before that goes away, and that's produced in a catastrophic amount. It's enough, and what we're talking about, just on the iodines alone, with just these particular 4 isotopes, is enough to saturate the thyroid glands of everybody in every species, which means we're all producing radioactive hormones. And Fukushima was 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129 in North America. So this industry hates our guts. It refuses to be held accountable. It has captured our regulatory agencies, our universities, and our medias, and key positions in governments worldwide. And we know this because that's the only way they can tell these lies and get away with it, because there's no dissenting voices. Even though the science is unbelievably clear, there is never no dissenting voices. And if you don't find me, you won't find any dissenting voices in an educational program on this planet. It doesn't exist. In fact, we're the only show in history to come out as an educational program and challenge the lies and assertions with documentation. Water barely contained the infernal. Well, you can't put water on it. You'll cause a steam explosion, stupid. So they didn't use water. And it was only once the ear was cut off. You can't cut off the ear to the reactor and that would put out the fire, because a chain reaction doesn't need oxygen to burn. It can burn underwater. It can burn in a mountain, in a deep geological repository. It doesn't need oxygen. And everything they're planning on putting in a deep geological repository will melt down at some point in the future. It doesn't need oxygen. And you can't pour water on these. Right? When they talk about water barely contained the infernal, do you know what happens when you pour? Because you're talking about a steam explosion. See the top of the beginning paragraph. Steam explosion was imminent. So if you poured water in there, you got a steam explosion. Now they emit 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures, I showed you just a moment ago. So how are you going to pour water on that without causing a detonation? Even like if it was just metal, you got a detonation. So they didn't stop the meltdown. It burnt itself. It's still burning down to the earth, most likely, because there's still 2 million liters a day going into the Atlantic Ocean from this disease factory. And it was once the air was cut off, because that's their cover story. They didn't cut off the air. How are you going to cut off the air? You got a nuclear meltdown. And they jacked people from the back rows of theaters back in those days, 1957. The poorest people sat in the back row and the rich sat up front, right? They didn't know what they were doing. So if you jacked busloads of people from the back rows of theaters and brought them into a nuclear meltdown, when you had all kinds of military, firemen, police, you had all kinds of academics, they didn't go there because it was catastrophic doses. And this industry, every facet of this industry is fine-tuned to poison everybody on this planet. And Windscale was the world's first full-scale atomic power station. Well, yeah, that's true, but the one out in Chalk River in 1955 that melted down was an experimental reactor. And we see that with a lot of these first reactors, their legacy, right? Enrico Fermi, there should be targets out there for shooting practice of that person. Maybe that's what I'll sell for Calm Down Charlie next, is target practice, shooting target practice signs. But he won't send me a picture because he's a coward. Until the April 1986 Chernobyl disaster, the Windscale Fire was one of the worst nuclear accidents in history and remains the worst in Britain. Well, that's debatable. Like, if you look at what Donneray's got done, idiots, and it's like, because it was a reprocessing site, and they put it over in Scotland because they didn't want the radioactive fallout directly in Britain. If you look what Britain done to the Christmas Island, it's frightening how evil that was. And if you look what they done to Marilinga and Montebello in Australia, that's horrifying. They also detonated over 700 dirty bombs. This industry will exterminate everything, and even when there's nothing left, only a couple of hundred people, they will refuse to acknowledge nuclear has any bad attributes. France, what they done to the French Polynesian islands was equal to a Nagasaki bomb a day for 12 years. And even today, 10, 12 administrations later, they still refuse to acknowledge that there could have been some adverse side effects. Despicable doesn't come close to it. Dangerous and horrifying and monstrous, you're on the right trail. For decades, government officials did everything to suppress the details of the accident, even shredding the papers. This is what they've done actually with Chernobyl, by the way. I wouldn't doubt it for 3 Mile Island, too, certainly. We know they've done it. They've done, like, a few years back, there was all the records of Fukushima from the communities. They threw it all away because they didn't have anywhere to put it, they said. Yet they spent $50 million building a museum in the nuclear wasteland within a few kilometers of the ongoing meltdowns. This has over 160,000 objects stored there, but they wouldn't store the records. Even shredding papers that laid the blame on staff misjudgments, poor organization, and shoddy safety instruments. This is before they actually, once you start the chain reaction, you're not standing up there. Corners, however, had to be cut rather than the standard water cooling system. The Windscale piles were kept cool with the air. These are nuclear reactors. You can call them piles all you want, but they're nuclear reactors. Were kept cool with air, which meant you were hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. A small sounding change would actually have easily led to radioactive air being blown out. Well, you can't contain radioactive air. How are you going to contain that? And if you put a filter there, how are you going to change it? Because it's so radioactive you can't get near it. It's a lethal dose like a sniper round. Lying is the only thing this industry is actually good at. And so when he suggested scientist John Krakoff insisted repeatedly that filters be installed in the 2 towers to stop it, that was simply symbiotic. It wasn't, you can't do it. And then on top of that, they placed it at the top of the chimneys, 360 feet up in the air rather than the base. And the filters were nicknamed the Follies by the engineer who saw the tech as overpriced and pointless. You can't contain the emissions. So these facilities at this plutonium mixed oxide reactors were hemorrhaging radiation straight into the environment. There was no containment whatsoever. And we know that because they used air. You can't blow air over chain reactions and filter that or even mitigate it. It can't be done. It's a disgusting, despicable, revolting, parasitic industry that has now threatened the existence of humanity and the species. These filters, however, would save countless lives. On October the 8th, an aluminum canister burst inside Pile 1, something the technicians were all too used to as they carried out routine heating. It didn't save countless lives. Now, the only reason they would put that even there is because they're trying to hide the crimes, because people are getting smarter and paying attention and understanding the lies. And when they put out a story, it's always about covering up their lies. So when you talk about filters, you can't filter it. Same as Japan is suggesting they're filtering water. It's ludicrous to suggest it. And if you go to my playlist, you'll see a ridiculous amount of documentation to back up my assertions. And by the way, I run an educational program, so I can't educate the population by being wrong. So if I don't know, I don't talk about it. Because what's the point? Because there's 9,000 facets, 9,000 industries in nuclear. There's no need to go into a territory where you don't know something. And that because I've been doing it for so long, so consistent, and the research expeditions for so long, so consistent, my assertions are only based on facts. Because I'm here to help people, not to hinder them, unlike the nuclear industry. Plant staff, however, had no clue this was happening. To cool down the pile, had no clue it was happening. So it could have been burning for weeks or months. To cool down the pile, which reached 400 degrees Celsius, now to believe anything these people tell you is a fatal flaw. They pumped more air into it. In other words, speeding up those cooling fans quite literally fanned the flames, but it pushed the emissions into the communities. Like, they're not surrounded by farms for something to do, okay? Let me impress upon you one more time. How much farmland we're talking about around these disease factories. So that's Windscale facility down there. There's over 1,000 nuclear buildings there. It's hard to appreciate how big that site is. So therefore, it's very difficult to appreciate how big all this farmland actually is. This is a satellite picture. But it's time to hold this industry accountable. And cuddling them and letting them get away and ignoring what they're doing is a fatal flaw. And you're responsible. This is your watch. You're obligated. Is your obligation to hold these people accountable. And every time I miss a day, I'm terrified of what else they've been up to. Plant staff, however, has no clue that was happening. Cool down the piles, reach 400 degrees. Again, lying is so natural. Ready to clock in for a shift, the Windscale foreman noticed smoke billowing out of the chimney. So if it was going on for days, as they acknowledged, how come they didn't notice it days ago? Because it was always doing that since they fired it up. Fearing a fire, they later realized the fuel inside the reactor was red hot. Inspection plug was taken out, and we saw to our complete horror 4 channels of fuel glowing brightly cherry red. He scaled the 80-foot ladder to reach the top of the tower, risking being contaminated by the radioactive material oozing out of it. Looking inside, all you can see was a dull red glow of fuel. Crews did everything to contain the fire, buckets of water. How are you going to pour buckets of water on 1,300 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, which most likely was a lot higher than that? Because you're going to have a steam explosion. Pumping carbon dioxide to heat up the oxygen and even pushing out the fuel cartridges, nothing worked. Well, the people that pushed out the scaffolding with the scaffolding poles, of all things, scaffolding poles. Telling lies, they're so prolific. I'm sure they believe their own lies. Nothing worked because it doesn't need oxygen to burn, stupid. But see, the average person doesn't know this, and so they'll buy into that propaganda, right? So no injuries were reported over the fire, but up to 240 people are thought to develop thyroid cancer due to the radioactive material, all of which all may have been fatal. 240,000, 2.4 million is more like it. 24 million is even more like it. Just remember, these places are surrounded by farms as far as you can see. Where do you think the radiation is going a couple of months down the road? It's going to your supermarkets, and it's doing that every few months. These sites are full of emissions. All the fuel on the site is vented into the environment, and everything is splitting atoms. So think about a reactor core that powers 1 million homes and businesses. How many atoms does it take to boil a glass of water? Like, the numbers are astronomical. It's way more than Google. So then how much atoms do you have to split to boil water to power the homes of 1 million businesses and homes? It's absurd numbers. Infinitely more than all the stars in the universe. And then there's nothing on the planet with an autoimmune trigger to defend against this stuff. So when you consume it, it's in your body pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. And because you're bioaccumulating more and more of it going in your body and sequestering in your muscles, your organs, and your bones, it's pulsing energy at the speed of light. Your body attacks, and all the damage that's created every second is destroying cells and chromosomes and DNA and everything else. Your body tries to repair that every single second from these pulses of energy almost at the speed of light. And then it attacks the source and tries to build a tumor around it in increments over a decade or more. And as you get thousands and millions of these in your body, your immune system is compromised. You're producing so much white blood cells, they call it leukemia, I guess. In 1987, a study by the Medical Research Council said children born in C-scale near the plant were 9 times more likely to die of blood cancers. I mean, they got cancer clusters of children, not counting everybody else, because no one's getting away with this stuff. All livestock within 310 miles was slaughtered. Really? All livestock with 310 miles was slaughtered. You didn't get rid of all the farms. They're still there today, aren't they? And sale of milk within 200-mile radius of the plant was banned. But you didn't ban the food, the nuclear food. These despicable people, man. On the International Nuclear Scale event, the Windscale Fire is considered a level 5, but it contaminated hundreds of square miles that you acknowledge, even though we know it's infinitely worse than that. 800 farms were affected. Yet, when Chernobyl melted down, it closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom, 3,000 kilometers away. But when you have a nuclear meltdown right there, you don't have anything near the same effect. Really, that's quite interesting. And it was the same type of reactor. It was a graphite reactor. Being scumbags is the only thing they're actually good at. They actually accelerate at it every single day. Gallons upon gallons of milk had to be dumped. Billions of gallons is more like, but they didn't do that, did they? Sales of milk within 200 miles of the radius of the plant was banned. You know, every time, like when I'm sitting here and putting these shows together, it's one of the most terrorizing experiences I go through. And I do it as many days a week as I can. I gotta admit though, like I should just sit there, start the show, and then bring stuff in and shift through everything. So we'll talk about that tonight, and we'll talk about this tonight. And just go through that whole process. You know how long that's going to take, right? Then I got 5 or 6 hour shows every day. But I really should be doing it. I should be doing the same thing for my news cycle. Just put the news up there, start doing the screen captures. Then after 6, 7, 8, 9 hours, then do the show nonstop. So that'll be like a 10-hour day every day. Because I don't think the world realizes how insane this industry is, and I can only cover a fraction of the insanity in a 24-hour period. Of their cover stories, their lies, their misrepresentation, their deceit, their dishonesty, their Machiavellian personalities. The Conservative Party leader, fearing the blast would threaten Britain's nuclear ties with the United States, ordered a report by the leading scientists to elicit the failings that led to the accident to be withheld. And he ordered a report by the leading scientists to elicit the failings to be withheld. We know all this anyway. And this story is from today, but the cover-up in this story is shocking. The person who wrote the story should serve the rest of their life in jail, at least. Any extra copies, he said, according to the letter from his office, stamped top secret, were to be shredded. So they drag you in with some of these tidbits, but then they tell you so many lies along the way that it's impossible for you to understand, even appreciate a fraction of the reality of what was going on. It's unconscionable. And it's definitely not tenable. Macmillan was stressed that revealing the details of the disaster would put the national secrets on the line. You poison everybody, and like everything else the nuclear industry does when you do it, no one gets to find out that it happened to them. Because, first off, they're criminally responsible, and second off, they poison everybody, including their friends and families and loved ones, and they couldn't care less, could they? Details that wouldn't even be known to the National Radiological Protection Board until 1986. It was quite convenient for them not to know until 1986. And what did they do? They didn't hold anybody accountable when they certainly could have. Couldn't they? Despite the fact that it was 29 years later. The cleanup of the site began the following year, with the first step being removed from the top of the chimney above both reactors and sealing them shut. This took them decades. Announcing the cleanup, the chairman of the Atomic Energy Authority, which is calling them authority, is really a crime on its own, isn't it? He expected the decommissioning efforts to take 10 years, but likely stretch into the 2040s. I don't know if they can clean up a site like that, see? And you can't bring back what you released into the environment. At over 2 million litres a day, every day, 365 days a year, from a plutonium mixed oxide meltdown from 1957, is revolting. It's revolting. And anybody who don't eat fish or can't eat fish, you're the lucky ones. Give or take, that would be about 100 years after the plant now called Sellafield. They changed the name to Sellafield because it used to be called Windscale. They changed the name to Sellafield to hide the crimes they done. Just like, it's unbelievable how evil this industry is and got away with it, thanks to the monarchy, the idiot monarchy, who sealed everybody's fate, didn't they? The worst of the worst. They're always the worst. You know how, I like how like Walt Disney will paint the prince as some kind of patriotic hero for the people, but they're the complete opposite. You ever see how like in Walt Disney, how they'll have the prince up in the balcony and he's waving to his adoring fans. What did he call them? There's a name they have for the population. They're certainly not fans. For their subjects. They're the worst thing could happen to a population. Ultimately, the only misjudgment of Windscale, she said, was that of the governments for believing they could push a nuclear reactor to its limit without consequences. Like, the person who wrote that story is disgusting maggot on our society, isn't he? 2001, plutonium, the legacy of Sellafield. Plutonium is discharged from the Sellafield since 1952. The total decay corrected cumulative discharge of plutonium up to 1995 was 717 terabecquerels. So that's 30 years ago. They're suggesting it was only 717 terabecquerels, which is a trillion atoms. 717 trillion atoms. Like the numbers, that's probably at least every year, minimum, for 67 years, of which most reside in the subtidal sediment within the Irish Sea. So why would they end up in just the subtidal sediment and just the Irish Sea? Why would they just stay right there when all the other particles travel right around the world, contaminated the Arctic on top of that? We got a ridiculous amount of studies acknowledging that. And they do that so often where they suggest the plutonium, yeah, brutal, but it doesn't go anywhere. It stays right there and hangs out because it likes us. So the people that do that are shocking. And this was another story today. I decided to run this story today because we are going to be talking about Chernobyl here and there. A burning forest near former Chernobyl nuclear plant, radiation makes extinguishing difficult. So how can the radiation be there all these years, 36 years later, alongside of Chernobyl, and when you have a forest fire, you liberate this radiation back into the environment? First off, fire can't destroy radiation, right? The anthropogenic man-made radiation, for instance, is not destroyed by fire, or chemicals, or battery acid, or anything else. And all you do is liberate it back into the environment, where it hunts down people and creatures and small animals and insects and the species, and destroys their health, because nothing on the planet has an autoimmune trigger that can defend against it. So burning forest near Chernobyl there's too much radiation to do anything. In an area near the former nuclear power plant at Chernobyl, forests are burning and firefighters' efforts are hampered by an increase in radioactive radiation. So all those farms are saturated with radiation too, around Sellafield, which should still be called Windscale, because that is its name. They only changed it to hide what they were doing. The damage and the harm and the genocide that's created by it. And the omnicide that's created by it. About 90 firefighters who entered the intervention are trying to extinguish the fire that has affected 20 hectares. But see, they most likely don't understand the radiation, because they wouldn't go there if they knew the difference. 2 planes and a helicopter were sent to the area to help the firefighters put out the fire. Radioactive radiation. Well, I don't know if I actually seen those 2 words put together before in that connotation. Does anybody remember seeing that before? If you do, you can call in at 709-589-4406 here in Canada. Radioactive radiation is still present. Hang on a second. We making noises over here. My apologies. Radioactive radiation. It's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. That was a story from the day, by the way. Did the United Kingdom cover up damage of Windscale's nuclear meltdown, considering every kid has plutonium in their teeth? Well, hell yeah, Dana. Thank you, everybody, for participating. I know the censorship is ridiculous, but that's what we got. Radioactive radiation is still present after the 1986 nuclear accident, and it closed 9,400 farms and islands in Scotland and United Kingdom. Around 400 are still closed today. 37 years later. We've done a presentation on Chernobyl on its anniversary this year already, right? And we do bring up a lot of studies from Chernobyl, but it ain't nothing compared to Fukushima. Chernobyl is just almost irrelevant, but it's not, because it was brutal. But when you compare it to Fukushima is an extinction event. Adding that there was no danger to the public. The radioactive contaminated area around their rooms were sealed off, and thousands of people were displaced. Like, telling a lie is so natural for these people. It's a wonder that they're functional at all. It's a wonder they can feed themselves. They're so busy telling lies. Windscale workers wear protective overalls. These are not protective overalls. Like, you need 4-foot thick underwear to protect you, or overalls to protect you, that got lead lined everywhere from just some of the stuff. You can't protect you from neutron bombardment or beta rays or alphas or neutron or gamma shines. Right, there was over 1 million people jacked off the streets by police with guns. There was, they used to run it on the roof in Chernobyl for 25 seconds. But the people you're looking at here, that's people from the theaters they stole from the theaters. It's not heroes. There is no heroes in the nuclear industry. There's a lot of zeros. 2008, on the occurrence of radioactive fallout over Norway as a result of the Windscale accident. So here they are talking about how Norway was contaminated, but their local area farms weren't. So wait, now you contaminated Europe, but you didn't contaminate all these farms, did you? A fire at the Windscale plant in the UK between the 10th and 11th of October, it never stopped melting down. There's still 2 million litres a day coming out of there, so it's still melting down. Resulted in the first publicised release of radioactivity to the wider environment. Although mainly classified in the 50s, 60s, recent years have seen incremental declassification of the reports, and the 50th anniversary of the accident was approaching. Results indicate that the radioactivity from Windscale was first detected at Bergen and Sola in the southwest of Norway, and a little later in the other side. Significant amount of radioactivity being deposited at these locations during the second and third week of that month. Well, then their Geiger counters would start breaking because there's so much radiation. They couldn't really read it properly after that. And they weren't setting them back in to get them recalibrated, right? A study, which is what you're supposed to do when you get a high dose on your Geiger counter. A study of the movement of radioactive materials discharged during the Windscale Fire in October 1957. Past studies examined the resulting ground level concentrations of radioactivity in the UK and the rest of Europe. Using trajectory models or the analyst of milk samples taken at the time. So there's a lot of studies suggesting all of Europe was severely contaminated, and this contamination is permanent. Windscale radiation spreads further than emitted. Yeah, the British are truly the worst, aren't they? The British nuclear industry, they really are, which is hard to believe, I know, but they really are leaps and bounds above your typical scumbag pro-nuclear. Contamination from the fire 50 years ago that did the world's worst nuclear accident spread across northern Europe. No, it spread across the whole planet, but Europe was brutalized. Atmospheric emissions from the Windscale accident of October 1957. So what I'm doing is, like that original story that came out today, which was the only story that came out today, downplayed the distance and the severity of this, right? So what we're just going to do, we're going to challenge that. And we're also going to bring up some studies on the Ticha River and the Keistum, the Mayak in the former Soviet Union event. That is still, what they've done in Mayak and continues to do today is just unconscionable. Americium, which decays to plutonium, by the way, and the intertidal sediments from the coastal environments of Windscale, 1981. They changed the name after that, clearly, which is Sellafield, right? They changed the name to Sellafield. The results indicate that the americium concentrations in the inner sanctuary sediments are up to 7 times higher than those from the Irish Sea itself. And the Irish Sea had how many terabecquerels? Over 700 trillion atoms acknowledged in the tidal zones. And that's just within a short distance of these disease factories. So here's a study saying that the results indicate the americium concentrations, which means you would have been loaded with uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium, and everything else, are up to 7 times higher than those from the Irish Sea. And the inner estuary sediments is a frightening. This is why we see that the loss of biodiversity is the legacy of the nuclear industry. You can trace it back to the nuclear industry, to the weapons, to the nuclear war they call weapons testing. It's the same nuclear bomb with the same radioactive fallout. Just because they didn't blow people up don't mean they didn't poison even more. Windscale radiocesium, the Clyde seed area. And notice how they always avoid talking about radiocesium, and which is a British terminology with the A. Introduced into coastal water and influence from the British nuclear facility's nuclear fuel reprocessing plant at Windscale, is present at significant levels throughout the Clyde Sea area, and concentrations reached maximum in April 1977, suggesting they had declined Around 30% of the Windscale radiocesium outpass passes through the Clyde Sea area. And less than 0.3% remain in the sediment. Really? And there appears to be no major radiological safety hazards. That's quite convenient. How is it that a nuclear meltdown hemorrhaging this much radiation has no adverse side effects? And some of these academics that participated in that study should be arrested and charged with crimes against humanity, shouldn't they? A study of the movement of radioactive material released during the Windscale Fire in October 1957 using data, incomplete data. Windscale and the leukemia controversy. Cancer in Cumbria, the Windscale connection. They have denied every connection to any kind of illness or disease or autoimmune deficiency or injury or illness for 67 years. The legacy of these people is the worst humans imaginable. They have destroyed the future of humanity and the 8 million species. And the people that get sick from these emissions is a horrible way to die. To call them misery machines is appropriate. Local variability in the distribution of Windscale fission products in the estuary sediments. There's a lot of these studies on the sediment. From the Ravenglass estuaries, northwest England. And so what I discovered a long time ago was all these estuaries, they have a lot of estuaries down there, all of them were studied, and they did find radiation and everything, but they always come up with the same conclusion that it was somehow harmless. And a single atom can destroy your health in increments over your lifetime. And what we're talking about is massive amounts. And when you acknowledge such a high ratio of plutonium, then how can you not have a high ratio of everything else? You don't just travel by itself. And they're only a fraction of the production. That's why it took them so long to make the bombs. But they're consistent. I really despise their contempt that they have for you and everybody else and the future of humanity. They have set the groundwork to destroy everything by doing what they've done. And the cover-up is unconscionable. It's unconscionable. It's still going on today. It's simply unconscionable that the way these people operate is not sustainable. The assessments of the radiation exposure of the public, and then they talk about external gamma doses. Why would you only look at external gamma doses? What about alphas? What about betas? What about neutrons? What about the X-rays? Iodine and Windscale. Ionizing radiation in the human gender proportions at birth. So if you get more males than females, you end up with less populations, right? And that's going to be true for all the species. And it's going to be more pronounced in the species on top of that. A concise review of the literature, complementary analysis of the historical data. Long been known that ionizing radiation causes genetic mutations, and that the nuclear bomb testing / nuclear war, nuclear accidents, the perpetual dumping into the Atlantic and everywhere else. What the British done to the Atlantic is unbelievable. It's evil on a scale that there's nothing I bet you there'll be nothing in history we can compare it to, let alone in the past. And the regular incidental emissions of the nuclear facility. Incidental emissions, the fuel pools are all hemorrhaging atoms from each fuel rod. So when you take the reactor out and you put it in a fuel pool, there's no containment. They're still splitting the same atoms. They need to boil water for 1 million homes and businesses. We got a call from Alberta, do we? Hello, Alberta.
Hey, how you doing, Dana? Adrian calling. How's things?
Good, we're live. You know that, right?
Yeah. I was going to say you're doing a great job on that. And one of the things I noticed is a lot of the what's put down now, anything on YouTube or on the sites is sort of being scanned over and controlled. You're not seeing real data, like in terms of how many people are watching or how many people likes. I got more likes on my computer than what you're showing. So it's sort of being controlled.
Oh, I know. Yeah, no. But most people don't, so that helps them appreciate it.
Yeah, I think you're doing a wonderful show too on that Sellafield to cover on that. I think it's just absolutely wonderful.
Are you in the chat room?
Pardon me?
You're not in the chat room, are you?
No. I'm right now just calling from
Alberta.
my home here in Alberta.
Right. Okay. Go ahead, my friend. I'm sorry. So you got any input on Windscale or Sellafield or?
Yeah, I was listening to your Sellafield talk.
Okay. You got any input you want to throw out there?
Oh, I was just listening to a lot of it. I got to absorb a lot of it, and sometime I'll call back again and have some good input. I've been sort of busy doing things,
sure.
Out of touch a bit, but back on a course with it, and I haven't stopped in terms of trying to make awareness with others. It's one of those subjects they're doing their best to lie about, especially in this country. It's horrible.
Yeah, no, it's heartbreaking for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I wanted to say great job, Dana. You're doing a wonderful job, and the
Thank
truth
you.
is like that because people just step all over it, and they want to do that. But I know on the hormone level too that people are being attacked, young and old alike. Doctors over here brought that up, and I've had conversations with them. I've been on the phone over an hour talking to the medical board about it. They know that something's going on, but they're all sort of politically incorrect.
They can't put their fingers on it a lot of times too. I noticed, right?
Yeah, it's just it takes a lot for honesty to come forward. But now I think how can they deny when it's starting to affect babies? We got babies that have tumors in their heads here. We got children that got cancers. I mean, this hasn't happened before, and so it's all come about more so.
Yeah.
Maybe a decade and a half, 2 decades, some prior to Fukushima and that because of other leaks and all the testing in the world.
The thing with Fukushima,
and that's what's led to a lot of mutation already with human beings, or some of the what they call intersex and problems that the humanity is already having.
Yeah. I was just gonna cut you off 1 second. Was that there was 55 countries banned the food from Japan for a decade allegedly, but Canada wasn't one of them, and so a lot of the heavily radioactive food was shipped to Canada. And through all the provinces, including Alberta, would have been heavily contaminated by their food sources for many years straight. And that was the worst radioactive food was shipped here. We know that now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was running around telling managers in Walmart, showing them my government ID and explaining to them, you got to get this Japanese food off your shelves.
Yeah.
So some of the stores will remove it. Next day, it come back out again. So it's not something, it's about money. Because how stores work, they make more money selling the product than putting it on a certain spot in the store. That's prime real estate, and they pay for that. So that's how the stores really make their profit. So I knew that. Were they going to put it back out? Sure as enough, Walmart turned around and put the rice and other products back out. And I was doing that periodically a few times, and I just gave up.
It doesn't. You can't defeat them. No, they were. Out in BC, they had prominent in the bigger supermarkets. They had sections dedicated to Japanese food, and it was just when an Olympic had got announced. I think that was 2014 or something. All of a sudden, that same year, these big, huge areas showed up where there was all kinds of food from Japan. And I used to be terrified to go down those rows of Japanese food. I complained about every one of them, obviously, right? And said, I'm not coming back anymore eventually. Okay, anything else you want to throw out there before we jump back?
Yeah, I just wanted to say congratulations. Good job, Dana. I'll call in another time and have more information and stuff to share. I just wanted to touch base with you. It's wonderful that you're covering it, and just keep doing a great job. And to hell with all the liars, because they are lying, and we know they're lying.
Oh, you can't. It's no good paying attention to them. No, that's for sure.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly. Don't stress out. God bless. Take care of yourself. Take care of your hormones, and you're good that way. And just hang in there. Be strong, Dana. You're doing a wonderful job.
You bet, man. Thank you. Good stuff, my friend.
You're welcome.
Take care now.
God bless.
Yeah,
take care, Dana.
God bless you. Bye-bye. It's Alberta, Canada, a radioactive wasteland where they shipped all kinds of deadly food, poison everybody. Let's get back after it because we're chewing up time now. We're up to hour and 15. I'm still not back to my normal yet. And I really wasn't going to do a show tonight, and then I realized what it is. It's the anniversary of Chernobyl, of Windscale and the Mayak, so bear with me, just have a little sip there. I guess I could turn the volume down when I'm doing it, but oops. So ionizing radiation and gender proportions at birth. When you say incidental emissions of nuclear facilities, it's not incidental. It's a massive amount released constantly, perpetually from each nuclear power plant. Fuel pools all day, every day. Once you take the first fuel out of the reactor and put it in a fuel pool, it's not safe to live within 100 miles of these disease factories forever. Everything is, because you can't perceive it, right? You can't smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or pick it up. You can't perceive it. For this reason, carcinogenic and genetic impacts of ionizing radiation has been an escalating issue for environmental health and human health studies in the past decade. And you too could call in if you want. It's 709, we're in Canada, 589-4406. This is a call-in show. Feel free to call in. The Windscale Fire, 1957, the Chernobyl, 1986. What about Chalk River National Laboratories? What about the 1959 Santa Susana, which was considered 460 times worse emissions-wise than 3 Mile Island? And that's quite a long time ago, they acknowledged that. And it's still melting down. It was a sodium reactor. It doesn't matter what kind of reactor. If it's nuclear, it's nasty forever. It caused alterations to the human birth-sex ratio at national levels across Europe. So when you're studying a sex ratio of males and females across Europe and you're seeing these statistics, the only reason you're looking for it is because you know it's going to be there, because you know everybody got irradiated. And childhood cancer, childhood leukemias are consistently elevated near nuclear disease factories, aka nuclear dumps, nuclear power plants. The Great Lakes are saturated with nuclear plants and nuclear dumps and nuclear fuel fabrication facilities. They're attacking the water. And without water, none of us exist. Water is our God, whether we like it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not. Water is your God. It's in contact with every person. So we all have that one thing in contact. We're all in contact with water. We're all expelling water, excreting water. And water is found throughout the universe, right? But without water, I mean, the ocean used to be a super life. Like a glass of water would have 1 billion creatures. Not anymore, of course, thanks to the nuclear industry, but 1 billion creatures. If that's not incredible, what actually is? Not like, we're talking about creatures and eggs and larvae and everything else. 100 million of them were the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain. These findings are generalized and collaborated by the observations of an increased sex ratio near nuclear facilities in Austria, France, Germany, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. So they're finding sex ratio discrepancies in Austria, France, Germany, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. In fact, Luxembourg a few years ago had added a new rule to its country that you can sue a nuclear plant 30 years after the plant, if you lived there, 30 years later, if you had cancer, or heart, or liver, or lung, or respiratory, or pituitary, thyroid problems, you can sue a nuclear power plant because there's a latency, right? Windscale inquiry. These people are so... if the world understood what was going on, these people would all be held accountable in a heartbeat. People would be just screaming for their heads. Environmental impact of particles emitted from the Windscale piles, from the Windscale nuclear meltdown. Calling it a pile is completely dishonest. You're avoiding calling it a nuclear meltdown. You're refusing to acknowledge what it is. From 1954 to 1957, So they're talking about before the meltdown. Higher concentrations, 100 to 200 picocuries in milk from farms immediately surrounding the Windscale plant. Like, it's hard to comprehend it, but that Windscale site is a massive site. It's got over 1,000 buildings on it. All of them are contaminated. This is a satellite photo. Everything is contaminated. And they're shipping food constantly from these nuclear meltdowns, nuclear sites. All of them are hemorrhaging radiation. They're all surrounded by farms, so they can poison you worldwide. It's a pretty insidious industry, no matter how you're looking at it. Oh, my computer, my external is not plugged in. Just bear with me. What's going on, baby? Here we go. It's not plugged in because it's not very bright. It's very difficult to see. We're like, oh, goodness. Come over to the poll here. Did the United Kingdom cover up damage of the Windscale nuclear meltdown, considering every kid has plutonium in their teeth? That story it's a fascinating story. Radiation events after the discovery of fission events. Well, they're catastrophic, right? Let me come back over here. And 2019... He said the most disastrous nuclear accidents at the highest 7th level of danger, the Keystone, 3 Mile Island Windscale accidents are described. Like what the British done by dumping all the nuclear waste, they weren't the only ones, but they were one of the worst ones, by dumping all the nuclear waste for 30 years directly into the Atlantic Ocean. That's worse than meltdowns. That's so hideous, it's hard to comprehend that anybody would be that evil or stupid, but they weren't stupid, see? 1957, you can't call these people stupid. Like the technology then, compared to now, is different, but they were smart. It was a revolutionary time, and they weren't stupid. Go back and look at the art. Go back and look at the music. Go back and look at the architect. These are not stupid people, okay? And Windscale accident. It wasn't an accident. It had no containment. There was no containment. Idiots. And so everything was vented all the time. Current reactor has a containment, right? A lot of that is burped into what they call burped. But these had no containment. You were using wind, blowing wind over a chain reaction, so all the radiation went up the stacks. That's why the stacks were 360 feet high. So they wouldn't land directly back on the site, right? That's why those stacks are so friggin' high. They're not going to do it for something to do. They didn't put it way up there, 36 stories up in the air for something to do. It was because everything was vented. You can't filter it because you can never get near the filter. And once the filter gets so radioactive, all the air that's coming up is going to be more radioactive when it passes through the filter. Because that's how a filter works. You can't filter this stuff. I disrespect the people that say they did on it, that study claiming they actually filtered it. And particularly that story from the day that suggested that that's what was happening when it's simply not true. You got to be quite a low life to be a journalist, haven't you? Disposal of radioactive waste from Windscale. This was a PDF file, and I was reading the PDF file, and I was like, oh, it never stops. Nuclear fuel reprocessing plant, which is the most criminal thing imaginable, reprocessing fuel. You're taking stuff that's already gone through a chain reaction, trying to reclaim the hot particles, so to speak. Or at least the useful ones. But in order to do that, you got to boil it in nitrous acid at over 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperature. You got to liquefy the fuel rods, and you can't contain those emissions. You can scavenge plutonium, uranium 235, for instance. But you can't contain the rest of the emissions. Everything is vented. It's monstrous. Clearly, this is the most monstrous thing you could do. The releases are catastrophic to everybody. Everybody's sick because of 80 years of nuclear emissions, because it never goes away and attacks everything with replicating cells. It's used to reprocess all the fuel from the nuclear power station, all the fuel from nuclear power stations. So all the nuclear power stations in shithead land, Britain, idiot land, are taken to Sellafield, and they used to be taken to Doneraye, right? Which is closed. Because what they done at Doneraye is unforgivable. They dug pits over 100 feet deep and threw their high-level radioactivity down in the pits. Because getting bomb material was more important than having a future on this planet. It's unconscionable. Every facet of the story is unconscionable that these people actually done this. The irradiated fuel arriving at Windscale contains a large amount of radioactivity. You're only using 3% of the fuel during the chain reaction. And the fuel rods get trillions of microscopic cracks into it, which means you're hemorrhaging radiation out. Physical atoms out of those microscopic cracks on top of the splitting of the atoms. That's why you hear me use the terminology disease factories. Because there's nothing on the planet that has an immune trigger to defend against the emissions. I was looking at pictures from, back when I used to just started this stuff, and I realized I grew very old doing this. But I did have an incredible accumulation of documentation over these years. It's unbelievable, actually, how much I have accumulated over these years. We have over 60,000 studies on radiation. I stopped counting after that, and that was probably 7-8 years ago. At one point, I had over 7,000 lectures on nuclear. The irradiated fuel arriving at Windscale contained a large amount of radioactivity, chiefly to form fission products, together with plutonium and other transuranic elements and unused uranium. Well, you're not going to get unused uranium from a used fuel rod. In the context of, I see what they're saying there. So let me get back to that point, that 3% of the fuel is used in the chain reactions. When they put it in a pool, we're still hemorrhaging, splitting atoms forever. They have to add 120,000 liters to each pool each day because it boils off that water. Each liter is going to be unbelievably saturated with isotopes. You're talking about 1,000 fuel pools worldwide releasing brutal plumes all day long. And so they try to reclaim some of the 97%, but they're only about 30% efficient, so the rest of it is released. That's why the Arctic is so contaminated, because the Loch in France, the Doneraye in Scotland, Sellafield / Windscale, that's their whole legacy. That's all they've ever done. Loch, reprocessing site in France, surrounded by farms, has over 500 security guards, because they don't want you taking pictures or walking around with a Geiger counter. The fuel is, yet they're surrounded by farms as far as you can see. If you do a satellite picture, you will never go to France, I can assure you that much. The fuel is dissolved and chemically separated in 3 principal fractions: plutonium, uranium, and fission products. It's a brutally inefficient way to do it, but it's the best way they got to get their hands on a bomb. Not that you can ever use it, idiots. A very large proportion of the waste fission-produced product radioactivity is evaporated into a small volume, stored on the site in special tanks, but some low-level waste accrues in large volumes of water which cannot be stored in this way. So they're saying very large proportion of the waste fission product radioactivity is evaporated to a small volume. It doesn't work that way. You can't take a large volume of this material and turn it into a small volume. It lives forever. It can't just turn into fairy dust. And this is disposed of into the Irish Sea through a pipeline terminating 2.4 kilometers offshore. Because they know what they're doing. Right? They know how evil they actually are. There's no way of containing it. And they're not going to stop making weapons because somebody makes money. And let's contaminate every species and every person on this planet destroy the children and the human race and the future of humanity, so these people can pretend that they're special to their families. This is disposed of to the Irish Sea through a pipe terminating 2.5 kilometers off the coast. Now, why are they talking about kilometers when they're actually not metric? During the past few years, the plant throughout the output has increased considerably in terms of both the tonnage of the radiated fuel and the quality of the radioactivity. They got over 1,000. They got buildings at Sellafield that they don't even know what's inside of it. It's so radioactive you can't go near it. No one's ever been there in 40, 50 years. They got fuel pools that are outdoors that are splitting all the fuel. They don't know what's in it, but all the fuel is still splitting atoms. And they're outdoors. How can you get any stupider than that, really? In fact, the input of the radioactivity, particularly alpha radioactivity, gammas, neutrons, betas, has risen faster than the input of the fuel, and although the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Agency has succeeded in minimizing the rate of the increase of the waste requiring sea disposal, really, which has increased more slowly than the input. Again, lying is the only thing that they're good at, besides genocide and omnicide. Over the hills from Windscale. There's quite a few of those stories over the hills from Windscale. So if you start reading these studies, remember, and you start seeing a whole bunch of them, they're different, so read them too. The time seems to have come for the reorientation of the public health services towards the UK Atomic Energy Authority. The recent accidental overspill of radioactivity atomic fission products on the countryside around the Windscale plutonium factory raises questions which extend beyond a particular incident. The answer may help the ordinary man to come to terms with the hazards that are the price for maintaining Britain in her place in the world of tomorrow. Remember that this Britain, United Kingdom, Sellafields, is short. This is a satellite photo, as far as you can see. And if you zoom back even further, there's still endless farms. All nuclear power plants have that particular attribute because they hate your guts. The public health authorities, so deeply absorbed in pursuing the minute of their personal service, must now recognize that they have very serious responsibilities in the environmental field of safeguarding against increasingly risk of radioactivity, because the production of radioactive material is now many thousand times greater than it was in the last decade, and that the public health authorities cannot afford the complacency of leaving all control to the producers of the fission energy and to the atomic physicists, the atomic monsters. This is an atomic plague, right? The problem is bedeviled by security must be accepted that what goes on inside certain establishments may be secret, but when the influences from them scattered injurious substances over the surrounding countryside, any consequent, and remember the countryside is farms. The best way to poison people is poison your food, right? Especially those people who live in the district and to the public health authorities whose duty it is to protect them. It never was. It was their duty was to protect the corporation and let you get sick and die. Although the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authorities have taken upon themselves an overriding power to monitor and hide their own misfeasance, it would seem sensible for them to share as much as their moral burden with the local public health authority as may be considered with the declassifying security information. They have not done so at the Windscale and Caldro Hall. Mortalities in Cumberland during 1958, 59, 78 with reference to the cancer in the young people around Windscale. So most of the studies that you're seeing were produced to downplay it. Right? Oh yeah, it was there, but it's like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine. Emissions from Sellafield and activity in the soil. So why are they doing these particular studies? Discharges of radioactivity from Windscale Piles and other installations at Sellafield remain a matter of concern. That was 1996. Through 30 or 40 years have elapsed since most of the emissions occurred. It doesn't matter if the majority of the emissions happen right away. It'll never stop the emitting. And just because the original massive amount was released, that doesn't mean the amounts that are released every day are not catastrophic. Secular trends in newborn sex ratios. These are super important stories. Man-made radiation is also shown to have played a significant role in relationships to the Windscale Fire, 1957, Chernobyl, 1986. That you're getting more males than females, which means less population, and that's true for every species. Radioactive fallout in Sellafield, Columbia, accounting for historical discharges to the atmosphere from the plant. Soil core samples, 95 locations within a few kilometers of the Sellafield disease factory, have been used to assess the cumulative deposits of plutonium and americium in the vicinity of the plant. And the disposition pattern, the radioactive fallout pattern, is characterized by high levels of plutonium, up to 20,000 atoms per square meter, within a few hundred meters of the site, declining rapidly to much lower levels, 1,000 per square meter within 3 kilometers. 5 per square meter is a catastrophic number. Again, what about all the other isotopes? How can it only be just plutonium? Because it can't. Patterns of disposition indicate, radioactive fallout indicated some of this additional release is associated with a known incident involving the Calder cooling towers in 1961. A further source of the northern part of the chemical separation area is also indicated. Well, the Sellafield site is ridiculous. And the reason they don't find too much radiation around the site is because it's farmland. And they're shipping the food off to your supermarkets with the radiation in it. That's why it decreases. But it doesn't stop coming out, so it never goes away. Monsters. These are monsters. They knew the adverse effects. They knew that there was no containment. They knew that everybody was popped. So they said, build it in prime farmland. These are monsters. There are no heroes in the nuclear industry, period. Let's talk about the Tetra River for a little tiny bit. Extra high doses detected in the enamel of the human teeth in the Tetra Riverside regions. Extra high doses. So, and they're talking about grays in tooth enamel. Several tens of grays. These are frightening numbers. Just in tooth enamel. Which means it's going into the bones too, right? Such doses were absorbed only in tooth enamel and should not be associated with exposure to other organs or the whole body. Like, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't just... Like, if it's in your teeth, then it's in your stomach. It's in your pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline glands. It's in your skeleton. It can't just be in your teeth. Cutting your throat is the most natural thing these people know how to do. Calculations of the individual doses for the Tetra River cohort members exposed atmospheric radioiodines from the Mayak, which is in the former Soviet Union bloc, right? It's still operating today, by the way. So, like, when you do a study on the radioactive iodines, then don't forget, you can't have that without the plutonium, the americium, the neptunium, the strontium. There's 1,000 other fission products. The mean total thyroid dose for the members was 193 milligrays, and the median was 53. The thyroid doses for 3% of the cohort members were larger than 1 gray. About 7% of the children born in 1940, 1950 had doses larger than 1 gray. These are absurd numbers. And if I remember correctly, a gray is equal to a sievert. 3 sieverts is considered a lethal dose. Chronic radioisotopes effects on the residents of the Tetra River, Russia region, 50 years after the onset of exposures. 2013. Individual cumulative absorbed doses in red bone marrow in the studied persons varied in the ranges of 0.01 and 4.4 grays. My goodness. A significantly higher level of unstable chromosome aberrations in T cells were observed in the group of exposed individuals as compared to the control group. A lot of times the control group is in a nuclear wasteland too, so it denigrates the facts. The highest UCA levels were detected in individuals who were suspected of having chronic radioactive syndrome, which is everybody on the planet now, isn't it? Preliminary assessments of current radiation doses to the population from contamination of Tetra River. A range of doses was calculated for different age groups. Well, why would you get different doses for different age groups? Assuming that the restrictions in places are retained, and secondly, assuming that there are no restrictions. Restrictions include ban on drinking river water. If you can't drink it, you shouldn't be there. And if you're there, you can't get away from the morning dew or the evaporation. You just simply can't get away from it. Fishing and bathing in the river, and prohibitions of the use of the river and surrounding floodplains by humans and cattle. Like, what are they talking about? Do you really think these impoverished people in a nuclear wasteland are going to say, well, we can't drink the water, we can't go fishing in the river right alongside of us, we can't do this, we can't do that, can't use it for farming? It's absurd. These are the most impoverished people in that part of the country. With restrictions, the highest dose estimated was, again, suggesting was not a time of microsieverts. For the most exposed, because this was in 2000, was it? Yeah, in 2000. For the most exposed adults and without restrictions, this increased to 3.4 millisieverts, or 3,400 microsieverts. And that's in 2000, many, many years later, many decades later, right? General approach to dose reconstruction of the population exposed as a result of the release of the radioactive waste. They just dumped the waste directly into the Tetra River, which I believe ran all the way to the Black Sea. Massive releases of fission products from the plutonium production facility Magnox resulted in the years 1949 and 1956. Still going on. Like they took all the fuel from I can't remember now, from the old Soviet Union nuclear submarine fuel exchange. What the hell was the name of that? I can't remember. I got it on top of my tongue for some reason, but tonight I can't remember. And which was abandoned for 30 years or 40 years. And some of those fuel pools were outdoors like Windscale, Sellafield. The whole story is just absurd. And they transferred a lot of that to Magnox for reprocessing. Because being evil is just natural for these people. And they got no way of getting rid of it, so they might as well poison everything. They're literally the stupidest people with an incredible education you'll ever come across is the pro-nuclear. This led to the exposures of the population in many riverside villages. Well, I had studies years and years, probably 20 years ago or more, where there was an estimated 7,500 little tiny communities along the Tetra River were abandoned. Long after, of course, the Magnox and the Custom disaster. There was multiple disasters, right? One of them was a fuel pool. There was a couple of really interesting ones. One was a fuel pool that melted down. There was another one where they had tanks, and the tank where they were storing the fuel in the tank because the fuel pool had melted down, and the tank melted down. There was another one shortly after that. They went to the top of a mountain. They built a road up to the top of a mountain where it was a natural lake. And they took the fuel all the way up the mountain, put it in the natural lake. And after about 10 years of doing that, they had a drought and the lake dried up. And so now the fuel burnt. And it contaminated another 1,000 square miles. And they knew this was going to happen. But you have to keep the fuel rods underwater or it catches fire and blows up, right? And then again, they studied due to external gamma rays. And primary strontium-90 was another one. So what about all the other isotopes, strontium-90? The biggest byproduct of the fuel rods is curium isotopes, by the way, not strontium-90. The internal dose is based on large-scale measurements of strontium-90 on the surface of teeth that begun in the 1960s. That's a completely inappropriate way to measure it. So if you're getting huge doses on the surface of the teeth, and they're suggesting that there was none intake, and so how do you get it on the teeth, on your teeth, and not intake it too? These are parasites. They said about 28,000 people were assessed. The medium dose to the red bone marrow was a quarter gray, and the mean dose about 0.4 grays, and about 5% of individuals the dose to the red bone marrow was estimated to be in excess of 1 sievert, 1 gray. And they done it by looking for X-rays, right, which is where the gammas, the alphas, neutrons, and betas, they hit each other almost at the speed of light and then change direction. That is called an X-ray. Like, these are the most dishonest people in human history. The pro-nuclear. We very rarely see them open their pie holes without a lie. Plutonium from Sellafield in all children's teeth. They done studies on everything. These studies were always meant to mitigate it, right? All the studies were meant to make you confused so you can't have a conversation. The studies were produced specifically so that you couldn't have a conversation and use facts, because the human is quite unique. If you give them enough facts, they can extrapolate on their own. Humans are very, very intelligent people. They don't realize a lot of times how intelligent they actually are. They're very capable, if you give them a bit of information, of extracting appropriate information. And so that's why they spend all these decades telling you radiation is like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine. That's why they say, well, you know, the fuel is very dangerous. They don't tell you the fuel is dangerous because it's splitting atoms. Trends in birth and birth-sex ratio in the vicinities of research reactor. Even research in the Canadian research reactor just got a 20-year extension, and is already 60 years old or something. And so if you go around it, you shouldn't just look for birth and birth-sex ratio studies. You should be doing studies on heart problems, and liver problems, and lung problems, and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline and Alzheimer's and dementia and autism and diabetes and Down syndrome and schizophrenia. Because these are all issues that will show up from the contamination because you're compromising your immune system on top of that. Milk ratio, followed iodine 131. Iodine 131 is the best way to make someone incompetent. I can show you endless studies. They're not doing that. They're not spending all that money because it's like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine. They're doing it because that's their cover story, right? And you see studies like this, Sellafield's nuclear pollution to the Irish Sea took decades to achieve. No, this was done right away. It was done right away. I mean, they're pumping 8 million liters of radioactive discharge into the Irish Sea every day. They've been doing it for decades. They're still doing it today. But the original plumes were catastrophic plumes. Nobody knows for sure how long that was burning, right? It's impossible. And the British they tell so many lies in the academic community that it's irresponsible to believe anything they tell you. They're the most dishonest people you'll ever encounter. That's the nuclear community. I mean, you're talking about when they don't find radiation, too much radiation over here compared to originally, because they're shipping the food out of there constantly. And so if you check the whole country that are eating the food, then you start seeing the illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries manifest, right? That's the reality of it. What have we got down here? Hang on. Ah, there we are. If you make it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Where's the poll to here? We'll bring it up. Did the United Kingdom cover up damage of Windscale nuclear meltdown, considering every kid has plutonium in their teeth? So if every child got plutonium in their teeth, then, which, bad teeth is a real issue when it comes to radiation, by the way, really high exposures. And there's a part of Britain where they got really bad teeth. And it's not genetics, it's radiation, right? Alrighty, I guess that's it for us tonight. Did the United Kingdom cover up the damage of the Windscale nuclear meltdowns, considering every kid has plutonium in their teeth? I got 100% yes. Bless your hearts, folks. Yeah, Dana Nasana is saying news shows today talked of a worldwide die-off of all wildlife, and they blame it on climate change. But climate change, the so-called climate change, is 80 years of nuclear emissions, pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second, and destroying the bases of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain in increments over that period, right? 80 years of poisoning is now coming back to haunt us. And Fukushima was a pulse event. And so I'm going to play Calm Down Charlie, appropriate song, who trolled us on the first couple of, first bit of the show. I just don't have time for him anymore. So the song I'm going to play for you was a song produced by James Lucid that a lot of people really, really like. Now, James just put out 8 more songs this week, or even more now, probably. And so he's trying his best, and he's only going to get better and better at it. But this was one of his first songs, so have a listen to this song and think about how much better you can possibly get, because if you're objective like I am, and you step back, this is a great song. And have a great night. Hugs for everybody. I apologize for being sick yesterday. I feel guilty, right? Not doing a show. I actually feel guilty. It's not easy. Don't forget you can donate. Everything helps, and very few are helping. So we can't fight back unless the world helps. Have a great night. Have a great day tomorrow. Hugs for everybody.
In the Tokyo Bureau, swirling smoke and neon beams. Chicago division, fueled by heated dreams. Calm down, Charlie calls in, voice smooth as silk. Says, Dana, you're dreaming, don't cry over spilt milk. On Dana Durnford's show, the chatter's turning wild, but Charlie shoots it down with that cool cat style. Unit 3's no killer, no harm to see life. He chuckles in the static, cuts through the strife. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show. With a snap and a grin, Charlie's voice so clear scatters the dread, dispels all the fear. Mux didn't hurt, he croons with a sigh. Science is for thinkers, not a whim or lie. Though Dana and the crowd may shout and roar, Charlie's unfazed, he's heard it all before. His swinging rationale like a soothing song. Says, hold on to logic, we gotta stay strong. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show.